Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my presentation, Supercharging Your Map Production with FME Auto and MAPublisher. Before I start, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hans van der Maarel, and I'm the owner of Red Geographics in the Netherlands. I started Red Geographics back in 2004, but I've been a MAPublisher user since late 1997, so it's about 25 years by now. And I've been an Avenza partner for pretty much that entire period. My first introduction to MAPublisher was being a beta tester for, I believe it was version 3.5. Red Geographics is a team of 3 people, so besides myself, I'm being helped by Inge and Veerle, and with the 3 of us we take on all kinds of stuff. Most importantly, we are a partner for both Avenza, so we resell their products, and we do training courses and tech support and promotion and everything, and we do the same thing for Safe Software, which is the producer of a package called FME. I'll tell you a little bit more about FME because it's quite important for this presentation, but I'll do that later on. And so, aside from just selling and supporting the software and doing the training courses, we also take on projects from time to time, and those projects that we take on tend to usually fall within the category of projects that require a high degree of automation or a lot of GIS data wrangling. And also, very important, we have a lot of fun. We're a fun bunch, we're a fun company, and I think that makes the work a lot more interesting. Now, a typical project that falls within that category of high automation is usually it's about producing multiple maps from a single base dataset. And it's usually topographic base data, and then on top of that we add touristic data, so hiking routes, biking routes, points of interest, you name it. And this is, for example, something that we've recently delivered. This is one of 10 map sheets that is going to be printed on information panels that are going to be posted in the field in southern Luxembourg. Now, for those projects, we usually have a challenge. So we need to produce a large number of maps. We need to adhere to high quality standards. We want to make good maps, of course. And we want to do it in a short amount of time. And I'm sure you've all heard that expression. You can have something good, fast, and cheap. So pick 2, you can't have 3. Well, we'd like to get as close to 3 as we can possibly make. So we have 2 great tools for that. Of course, we have MAPublisher, which I'm sure you all know, and we have FME. So let's make them work together. Now, before I tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to take a sidestep and introduce FME for those of you who don't know it yet. So FME is an ETL toolkit. ETL stands for Extract, Transform, Load. So you take data out of something, you transform it, and then you load it back into something else. And it's mainly meant for geographic data, although in the past couple of years it's been going into the non-geographic data market as well. And basically any kind of data that's structured and in a supported format can be processed by FME. And considering it currently supports about 450 formats, you'd be very hard pressed to find a format, especially geographic, that isn't supported by FME yet. Which in itself makes FME a very interesting add-on to your MAPublisher toolkit, because MAPublisher, of course, can import a couple of different formats. If you happen to come across a format that MAPublisher can't handle, well, chances are FME can. And the great thing is that when it comes to the transformation of the data, it works with a flowchart interface. So you have a visual interface of your process, what your data has to go through. And by connecting all kinds of different transformers, as they're called in FME, you can make complex processes. So every transformer has its own action that they perform on the data. There's about 500 different ones at the moment. So as I'm sure you can imagine, if you combine them, you're you've got limitless options. Your imagination is really the only thing that's holding you back. So here's how we usually set this up, and we make use of FME Auto. FME Auto is an extra cost add-on for MAPublisher. You can order it through Avenza or through partners like Red Geographics. And it consists basically of two things. It's a writer in FME. So a writer is a component in FME that writes out data to another format. And then for MAPublisher, it turns into a extra input format, which is the FFS format, FME's internal storage. So we take that FME Auto plugin, and then we combine it with existing automation options that are already in MAPublisher. And by doing that, we can cut production time on those maps in some cases down to seconds. It depends on the complexity of the map, and they may not always be like print-ready maps after a couple of seconds, but it saves you so much time. Not only just time, but it also saves a lot of tedious work, like importing a couple of layers from a database and make sure that they're in the right order, and I have to repeat that for 100 maps. It becomes a drag. So the setup that we have, I've created a small sample project for this. The setup that we have is we've got a PostGIS database with cartographic data. It's 1 in 10,000 scale data for the Netherlands, for the entire country. We're connecting to a WFS service that a data supplier is hosting, which contains bike route networks and mountain biking routes, again nationwide. And then we've got a separate shapefile with, in this case, 4 map sheets defined. So what happens is FME is going to read that shapefile with the map sheets. It's going to use that to read data from the database and from the WFS service, clip those data sets to the map sheets, make sure that all of the data is going to MAPublisher in the correct order, so all of the layers end up in the correct order, and it does a little bit of pre-processing on the data. Then for every map sheet, it sends that data onto MAPublisher. This does require that both MAPublisher and FME are installed on the same machine and that Adobe Illustrator is already up and running. When the data is coming into MAPublisher, it's automatically applying predefined map themes. So we're using a template document with the map themes defined. Those are applied automatically, and then label pro settings are also applied automatically. And in the end, the file is saved as an AI file, Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to take a closer look at the FME side. So this is the process. Over on the left side, you'll see the reading happening. So the first one is read the map sheets out of a shapefile, and that's being used to trigger 2 transformers, the 2 feature readers, which are each reading data from another data source. So the first one, the top one, is doing the PostGIS database, and the bottom one is doing the WFS service. And one of the interesting things about the feature reader transformer is that it can use the extents of an initiator feature to query that external data source. So it's reading only the stuff that falls within my map sheets from the database and from the service. Then we do a bit of clipping to make sure that everything is nicely cut to the borders. We do some sorting to make sure that everything ends up, all of the layers eventually end up in the correct order, so we don't have to do that manually. And then a little bit of processing, basically just filtering out some geometry types. Some of those layers in the database, they contain both points and areas, and like for example for the buildings I'm only interested in the areas, and so on. And then everything is being output to MAPublisher by a writer. And so the brown blocks on the right, they correspond to layers that are going to end up in MAPublisher. There's a couple of settings on the writer that we need to make sure that we use correctly. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying a template file to be used. So that's an empty Illustrator file with just a couple of map themes and a predefined artboard. I'm looking for that word. I'm specifying that it's using the map sheet name as the file name. So every map sheet ends up as a separate file. I'm specifying that once it's done reading and processing, it should save and close the file, so it doesn't keep it open in Illustrator. And then on the map view that it sets the scale to 10,000. Then for the sorting, I assign a number based on the original table or feature type name from the database or the WFS service. And that's being used then to sort the data. And since those tables correspond to layers in Illustrator, this makes sure that all of the layers end up in the correct order. Going on to the MAPublisher side. So I've got a couple of map themes set up. And for every map theme, I've specified the auto assign options. Now, this is a feature that you may not be familiar with, but basically what it means is that in this case, as soon as a layer is being imported which matches a certain criterion, in this case a layer name matches or contains the word terrain, then it's being applied to this particular style sheet. And so we've set it up for all of the map themes that we've done. And this will automatically make sure that the layers go to the correct map theme and it applies them. And you can set that up in the MAPublisher automation settings. That's that little lightning bolt icon in the import-export group. So I've specified that applicable map style sheets are going to be applied. And then a few tabs to the right, there's the labeling tab where I can specify that label settings need to be applied. So let's see this in action. I'm going to switch over to FME. Here's that process that I've set up, and I've already got Illustrator running in the background. I'm going to hit run. It's going to read data from my shapefile. It's then going to read data that falls within the shapefile from an online database and from the online WFS service. You can see the numbers adding up. That's the number of features being read. As it's going through, you'll see that it's going to go through the sorting part and then the filtering part and the processing, and it's now busy writing. It's pushing the data onto MAPublisher, which you'll see opening up in the background. And it's going to go through, in this particular case, 4 separate map sheets that are going to be written. You'll probably hear my laptop fan going crazy in the background. And that's it. So that took, I don't know, I think it took about a minute. And I've got 4 map sheets that are done exactly the way I want them. So there it is. I've got all of my layers. I can see that the Label Pro layers have been added. They're all in the correct order. So this is, like I said earlier, this is maybe not a finished map yet, but it's definitely something that saved me a lot of time. If I would have had to do this manually for a lot of maps in a row, it would be a very tedious process. So let's switch back. One of the things to keep in mind is that we usually use this for maps, but it doesn't always have to be maps. So here's a sample of something that I've done last year. We were asked to produce about 200 of these elevation profiles for hiking routes in Luxembourg. And so we had a file geodatabase with routes and contour lines. We used FME to generate a DEM out of the contour lines. We drape the route over the DEM, so it turns into a 3D line. And then we generate a profile where the x-axis is the length along the route using measures within FME, and the y-axis is the elevation. We take that out of the 3D route. We output the whole thing to MAPublisher. We apply the styles, and another option in the MAPublisher automation settings is to automatically save a PDF file, which we've done. So we hit start, and it's I think that one, since it's about 200 files, I think that one took about 15 minutes to run through. So yeah, we can cut production time down to seconds, and it's amazing. So in conclusion, we'd like to say we love making maps, but we like to automate the boring bits. So we leave time for the fun parts of the cartography there, so the actual twiddly bits of text placement and all the fun stuff. The other good thing about this setup is that automation brings also a reduction of user error. So I'm sure you can imagine if you have to go through the same steps to produce, for example, one of those elevation profiles, and there's 200 of them, you're going to get bored and you're going to lose focus and you're going to slip up and make mistakes. Like, for example, saving it with the wrong layer order or saving it under the wrong name or whatever. And hopefully you catch those mistakes in time, but there is a risk that you don't. And so if you can automate as much of that as possible, you're going to take that risk away. And so FME Auto, or FME in general, I think is a great addition to any MAPublisher toolkit. I think anybody who's using MAPublisher a lot could definitely benefit from this. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to stick around for any questions that may arise, but you can always contact us or check us out on social media.